For the recording, it's Monday, July 25th, 2022, 6 o'clock, and we're in the high school auditorium. I will call to order the budget hearing, and in a moment I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tadlock to take over, go through some accomplishments. But first I want to say thanks to the staff for another great year. It's been a tough couple of years, to be honest, and we got through it, so we're going to keep pushing forward. I think things are looking up, and just keep up that great work, because there's a lot, to be honest, it's a lot of hard work for the folks that are listening at home to put together everything that goes on in this district, and maybe it'll all come together at the end of the year. So, Mr. Tadlock is online, so he should be, we can pop him up on the screen here.
All right, am I good to go? All right, welcome everybody. I'm joining the meeting from Idaho, so I couldn't be there with you. We're taking my daughter out to college, and so I look forward to getting back home. But I just want to take a moment and share with you again, everybody in our community should have received what's called our annual report. We started this a number of years ago. I want to give a big thanks to Brenda Harris, who throughout the year compiles the different articles, the different snippets that go into the annual report. And if you didn't get one in the mail, we should have copies there at the high school auditorium for you that you can be sure to pick up, or I know we always have them available at the district office. We divide our annual report up into three areas: tradition, innovation, and distinction. And there's a lot of information in the report, so I'm not going to go through it page by page, but I do want to highlight a few items of note. In our innovation section on page 5, if you take a look at that, we have our outdoor classroom that was constructed and put together at the middle school in cooperation with Wausau Homes and a number of other business partners. There's a little article on that. And then we also have a highlight of our redefining ready work, which Mr. O'Donnell mentioned a lot of the hard work that's been going on in the district despite dealing with the pandemic and everything else. We've still seen tremendous success from all of our students and our success and our staff. And those successes are highlighted in that redefining ready section that I encourage you to take a look at. In the center folder of our book, we have put together what we've been working on for a number of years, but it's called Profile of a Graduate. And it looks like this right here. This is put together based off of all the school district's missions or belief statements and trying to condense it down into what would we like every student from the school district of Elkhorn to have in regards to skills and traits as they leave our high school. We broke those down into 4 areas: communicator, critical thinker, navigator, and to be resilient. And there's bullet points under each of those. I encourage you to take a look at that. In our area of distinction as well, I'd like to recognize our high school guidance counselor, Secretary Amy Glassell, who was recognized as 2022 Secretary of the Year. And also want to wish her well as she accepted a position to go work at Disney as a baker. So in Lena's final year, though, she was recognized as the best in the state of Wisconsin. Congratulations to her. Also, Mr. McBurney received a full leadership award as a middle school principal. I want to thank him for his work and service. On the following page 11, our Skills USA chapter was recognized with the gold level. And again, our hosts year after year after year just continues to not only dominate the state level, but at the national level. And I want to congratulate Stephanie Steinke for all of her work with HOSA, and Kathy McNeil, who also helps with that organization as well now. And over on the top right-hand corner of page 12, this is, I want to make sure people don't miss, but Mike Dahlke is a business and education teacher over at the high school. He also serves as an esports advisor, but he's also the chair for the state of Wisconsin in esports. And he was recognized at the national level of esports. If you don't know what that is, that's electronic gaming. And we have a team we have had for several years, and it's the fastest growing sport in the country. But Mr. Dolly was recognized as the National Coach of the Year in esports. That's a huge accomplishment and an incredible recognition. So I wanted to highlight that and pull that out as well. In the athletics section, it highlights a number of our athletes on page 13 who went to the state. And then we also have the Project Leadwood distinction. We received once again one of 25 school districts in the country to be recognized as a distinguished district. And on the back page, again, we've received district recognitions from the RTI Center in Wisconsin, from the U.S. News, and then we became one of only 2 school districts in the state to be considered Avid Administration schools of high school and middle school. And also we were awarded from AP a Diversity in Education Award for the percentage of female students that were participating in the AP Computer Sciences. And as we get ready to head over into the budget overview, I always like to highlight on the very back page, again, there's not a lot of schools in this comparison. We put in some local schools, but we also then have a number of school districts that are similar in size to us and population of their communities that we incorporate as well. And you can see our per student expenditures. And it's something that we always take a lot of pride in, the great work that we're able to do for students while having a very reasonable per student spending. Reasonable, to be honest with you, I'd love to see it a little bit higher. We're amongst the 10 lowest spending per student districts in the state of Wisconsin. But I want to thank all of the team and order for us to accomplish it. We've been highlighted in that annual report. It takes the work and efforts of all of our staff at all levels. I want to thank them and let them know how much we appreciate them, especially during these past 2 or 3 years, which have been challenging. We look forward to continuing on and dealing with new challenges, but still pressing forward. So thank you. That's all I have. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Tillman for the budget report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tadlock. As we go through some of the budget information, I'm going to highlight a couple of different components or themes here as we go through. The first one's going to be looking at some basic facts for our school district. I updated a number of charts about our school district. We'll then take a look at how we compare in a number of different categories with some other comparable school districts, and then take a closer look at this year's proposed budget and tax levy. The first chart I wanted to share with you is a line graph that shows our head count enrollment. And it shows over about 32 years of change in the school district enrollment. You can see we've seen some pretty significant increase in enrollment going back at that time. Again, this is head count, which represents those students who are resident students attending our school district, and then those students who are non-resident that are attending under the open enrollment program. Taking a closer look at the open enrollment program, you can kind of see the change in that program, how that's affected our overall enrollments. For students that come through the program, the school district receives a little over $8,000 per student for regular education. If they qualify for special ed education, then it's a little over $13,000 per student. Another way of looking at our student count is kind of the combination of our resident students and then our open enrollment end. And when you take a look at that, the purple represents our resident enrollment history. And you can see it's been relatively flat. The growth we've seen has been open enrollment. And that's what's represented in the gold section. Taking a look at our finances in terms of revenues and where are the sources of those revenues, there's really 3 main sources. The first one is our local sources, which is made up mostly of our annual tax levy. We also receive some student fees and some gate receipts for different events that we hold. The second major section is state sources. State equalization is the largest chunk of state resources we receive. We also receive a number of categorical aids, which include a per student aid, includes a library aid, transportation aid, and then 13% of our revenues is open enrollment. the revenue that's generated from that. The last section is federal sources, and if you were to look at this pie chart about 2 or 3 years ago, that would probably represent about 3 or 4%. And the reason it's a larger percentage now is the COVID dollars that we've received, or ESSER dollars, and we'll talk about that a little later. Now, how are those monies spent? And the largest chunk is people. It's our personnel costs. It's about 76% of our overall expenditures. The largest share of that is salaries, and then the next one would be benefits. Health insurance being our largest benefit cost. Outside of personnel, 7% of our budget is for supplies, equipment, licensure for software that we have used for instructional purposes. 5% of our expenditures is student transportation, another 5% for utilities, maintaining our facilities. Then students that are resident students that attend other school districts, that ends up being an expense for us. And that's what you see under open enrollment out. And then the remainder is other purchase services, which could be tuition services for kids that attend programs outside the school district, and our CESA services. So this bar graph shows our long-term debt obligations. You see 3 different colors here. It's because we have 3 different outstanding long-term debts. The red line represents our 2015 referendum, and that was for just about $20 million. We bonded that for 17 years. We have about 10 years remaining. And you may recall that was for addition projects onto all 3 of our elementary schools and the high school, along with some renovation work in all of our facilities. The 2016 referendum was just for $22.9 million. That was for a 20-year bond issue. We have 14 years remaining. And that included the purchase of property between the middle school and the high school, the development of the Agility Center, the renovation of this room. Also included other improvements in terms of facilities both outside and inside here at the high school. And then the last referendum, which was in 2020, was for the purchase and renovation of the old St. Pat's School to our option school facility. Our total outstanding debt right now is about $40 million. By state law, we cannot exceed 10% of our property value in terms of our debt. And our debt load right now is about 1.5%. This line graph shows the property value of all property within the school district. This is determined each year by the Department of Revenue. And this represents the market value of all property within our school system. As you can see, it's changed over time. When we had the housing crash in 2008, you notice that the actual housing values went down a little bit. Now it's starting to go back up. This past October, which would have been 2021, we received probably the largest increase in property values. It was over 9%. Much of that, I think, was more just appreciation of property values as opposed to new tax base. This chart just shows the historical projected tax rate for the school district. This is looking at our annual levy divided by the property values. It gives you a rate per $1,000 of equalized value. Back in the early 90s, that was much higher than it is today. About 1994, 95, the state began to pick up 2/3 the cost of education and also put in revenue caps. And since then, it's stayed relatively consistent. I think another way of looking at the change in our levy is kind of the history of how our levies changed going back to 2011. At that time, our levy was a little over $18 million. The proposed levy right now is just over $21 million. And this would be a levy for our operating budget, our debt service, and our community service fund. Another way of looking at that is how has that changed over time on a percentage? And you'll see some years it's gone up, and some years it's actually gone down. If you look over the 11-year history here, it's gone up on average about 1.42%. That's the total levy for the school district. So taking a look at some of the comparables. So we included the K-12 districts that are part of the Southern Lakes Conference, just area schools, and then some other schools based on factors in terms of enrollment and the population. So the first one shows the enrollment comparison. There's 10 districts here. Most of them are familiar probably to you. Eshuawana is actually encompassed around Green Bay. DeForest is north of Madison, and Onalaska is just north of La Crosse. You see the largest of the districts here is DeForest, and then followed by Elkhorn. Free and reduced lunch eligibility. This chart is actually a couple of years old. And the reason for that, since COVID started, the federal government, federal national lunch program has gone to a universal lunch, providing free lunch for all students. So there's no longer necessary for us to maintain the free and reduced categories. That will change this fall, and we'll be going back to the free and reduced program. But you can see the differences within school districts and the percentages within those schools. Per student expenditures, Mr. Tadlock talked about that earlier in terms of where Elkhorn rests with the other school districts. Elkhorn does continue to be one of the lower spending districts. Some of that has to do with the revenue caps. The creation of those revenue caps back in the 90s tends to lock districts into those spending levels since that time frame. Equalized value per student. This is used for a couple of different purposes. The main thing is the amount of state aid that we'll receive as a given school district. If you notice here, East Troy's value per student is pretty high. It's the highest of this chart. And you notice that Milton is the lowest. The way state aids work for school districts is the more property value you have per student, the less state aid you receive. So when you look at this in terms of the percentage, you'll see East Troy is at the lowest percentage, and Milton is at the highest percentage. This next chart shows fund balance. Fund balance is kind of the equity of the school district. It's asset minus liability. And this is used for cash balance, for receivables that is necessary for meeting the cash flow needs of the school district. It's also used for any emergencies that may come up or one-time planned activities. When financial institutions look at bonding school district referendums, this is a number they look at very closely in terms of the amount of fund balance a given school district has. Now taking a closer look at the budget. The state of Wisconsin does a 2-year budget process. They call it a biennial budget. And 2021-23 was their biennial budget. For the state of Wisconsin, about 40% of their expenditures is K-12 education. So they tend to set the perimeters both financially and limitations for school districts and how they can operate. In this biennial budget, they did not provide the ability for us to increase the revenue cap. The revenue cap is a formula that dictates the amount of revenue we can generate through state aids in our annual tax levy. I'll kind of show that to you in a moment. There's also a per pupil aid, and that was not increased. That was locked in at the same rate. We're projecting about a 2% increase in special ed aid. The funding at the state level right now is about 28% of costs for special education. And there's some additional mental health grants available as well. Take a look at the revenue cap piece. So that's the formula we use for the revenue cap. There's a per pupil allocation that's multiplied by our enrollment. It's a 3-year average enrollment that gives us our revenue cap for any given year. Once we know what that number is, and that's determined in October, we then wait till we get our state aid number. That's called the certified state aid number. Once we know that, the difference between our revenue cap and the state aids is the maximum amount the school district can levy for property taxes. So that's the calculation. The number of the 10,362 typically is adjusted each year for inflation. And I wanted to show you kind of a history of how that dollar has changed. So this goes back to the year in revenue caps we created, which is 94, 95. And you can see almost every year we had an increase right around $200 per student. One year I think it got up to about $275. Until the year 2011, 2011-12. And that was the year of Act 10. You may recall Act 10 required school districts to reduce expenditures. Employees had to pick up more of the cost for insurance and Wisconsin retirement. So that's why that went down in that year. Since that time frame, the state's done a combination of adjusting the revenue cap and also implementing what's called a per pupil aid. That's what you see in the gold. Thing I wanted to point out, if you look at 22, 23, 21, 22, and 22, 23, you'll see no increase. It's the first time we haven't had an increase in a 2-year state budget. So why is that? Well, the response that we have from Madison is that we receive COVID dollars, ESSER dollars. And those are what we're supposed to use basically to fund the needs of the school district. So what are these COVID dollars? For our district, it came in the form of what's called ESSER money. And that's really what came through for all school districts. And it stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Funds. And there was a wave of these dollars, ESSER 1, 2, and 3. We received about $4.5 million, the combined amount through the ESSER program. Much of that, at least starting off, we used to deal with mitigation of COVID. We'll talk about that a little bit more. The remaining funds we're using to backfill our budget needs. So we're using a chunk of that for this past year's budget, and we're proposing using same funds for 22, 23. We also anticipate that those dollars will be gone at the end of this next year. That will also start a cycle of the new state budget. So there's a lot of anticipation of what the state budget and how that may rebound some of the lost ESSER dollars. This chart just gives you a better sense of the dollars involved here through that ESSER 1, 2, and 3. And there's a lot of latitude in terms of how we can spend these monies and the length of time to spend these monies. Now, what makes it kind of unique for our school district, well, all school districts, is how these dollars are allocated at the federal level. And they use what's called the Title I formula. And the Title I formula looks at poverty level, looks at census information, and then distributes the dollars based upon those categories. So one of the things I wanted to share with the group is how that would break down on a per student basis for area school districts. And you'll get a sense when you see this of how that dollar on a per student basis varies. So for our school district, it ended up being about $926 per student. Other districts you can see are a little higher than that. On a statewide average basis, it was about $2,670. And then you see MPS received over $11,000 per student in ESSER funds. So just wanted to share with you that the dollar amounts vary greatly across school districts. Our state legislator had a little bit of control over a small percentage of those dollars, and they chose to make sure every school district received some minimum dollars, and then those districts that provided face-to-face instruction, such as Elkhorn Area School District, also received a little more dollars. But most of it, there was no control other than what the federal government indicated. Highlights. So as I mentioned before, we're going to be using the ESSER dollars to backfill budget needs for 22-23. We're also going to use some transfer service. Transfer service allows school districts to increase their budget if they have students that move into our school district, new resident students, that have either special education needs or they have English language deficiencies. So we're using that mechanism to fund some of those needs. As a result of that, we're looking at additional positions, a lot in the special ed area. So we include aides for our elementary schools. We're also looking at ELAs for elementary and middle, and half-time teacher at the middle school. High school, half-time art, and half-time tech ed teacher. Additional special ed teacher for our career college academy. We're looking at additional interpreter services for student needs that come into our school district, and also speech and language services. Finally, we're looking at a community grant writer position through our community service fund. That would be funded through the community service fund, although we're partnering with the City of Elkhorn, Chamber of Elkhorn, and Matheson Memorial Library as well, is doing a group process with the grant position. Other general highlights for our budget. We have adjusted wages and salaries based on inflationary factors of 4%. Our student transportation contract would be going up 3%. Health insurance, we're looking at budgeting 10% increase in January. And just overall inflation impact that we've had to adjust, especially in the area of utilities. And we pay for gas for school buses, and that's the other area that we've had to adjust. Our total general fund special education budget is going up about 5%. Our state equalization aids are going to be going down. And the reason for that, if you think back, has to do with the amount of students behind our equalized valuations. Our valuations, I mentioned earlier, went up significantly, about 9%, and our resident student enrollment went down slightly. So that has a negative effect on the amount of state aids. So overall, we're looking at about 3,600 students, 450 full part-time employees, and then a proposed tax levy of $21,591,563, or a 5.97% increase. And then this tax levy summary sheet, you see a comparison of last year's levy to this year's levy. We're anticipating about a 3% increase in equalized value. That's probably a conservative number, but I think it's more realistic on the impact of actual homeowners. And then how this would appear in terms of property taxpayers at $200,000. So that concludes the budget presentation. Go down and turn back to you. Are there any questions?
We can get a microphone. We can get you a microphone if you have a question. Who had the question? No, I just said, John, you have a microphone.
Oh, I do, I'm sorry, I thought you said someone had one.
You don't have to yell across the room.
I was. Ready to go.
All right, well, not hearing any questions, then we'll declare an end to the budget hearing, and we'll open the annual district meeting and call that to order. So first, I need to figure out who is able to vote, clear the room, basically. I guess is what they call it. You don't need to leave, but so we need to. If you are a resident of the Oakland Area School District, you are able to vote when we start doing our motions here. If you are not a resident of the Oakland Area School District, you are not eligible to vote. So if anyone is not a resident of the Oakland Area School District, would you please raise your hand so that I can? Okay, so we have a few people. So just don't say A or nay. All right. So moving on from that, we need to elect a chairperson. We'll look for nominations.
I have a motion to appoint Susan.
All right, so we have a nomination of Susan Livesley to take over that position. Do we have any other nominations? Any other nominations? Any other nominations? I don't hear any, so I would ask that a motion be taken up to close the nomination process and the majority vote be cast for Susan Livesley for that position. Is there a second? All right, it's been moved in second, so all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, Susan, would you be willing to do that? All right, she's going to come up. Thank you very much, by the way.
Thank you. Before we start that, I just want to add, Jason talked about the annual report, but I had this in the mail. I was really blown away. I've seen it every year, I always read it, but I really read this from cover to cover. And if Brenda Harris is the one responsible, we need a big thank you to Brenda Harris, because this is above and beyond. I give it to my husband to read it. I mean, he hears me talk about all these programs that we have, and we talk about the school wherever we go. Wow, just wow. So, wow to all of you who have part of this, but I just was blown away by that. Okay, first on the agenda for our annual district meeting is the school board treasurer's report. So Julia Ingersoll. Come on up.
Good evening. The treasurer's report can be found on pages 13 to 19 in your annual meeting report. If you didn't get one, they're on the back table back there. Bill Truin is the district business manager, as you saw earlier. And if you have any questions regarding the annual report, he has my full confidence and support, and you can direct on any questions to him. I just want to personally thank Bill for the incredible job that he does for our school district. Not only, his job is very difficult, but he also saves us a lot of money in many, many ways that the general population doesn't see. And it's hard to understand that when, we see that we're having to spend more and increase budgets, but the behind the scenes work, if he didn't do what he does, it would be much higher than it is. So, thank you, Bill.
Okay, we need to formally accept the treasurer's report as presented in our budget meeting report. So I'm looking for a motion to accept that.
I make a motion to approve the treasurer's report as written.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded to approve the school board treasurer's annual treasurer's report as printed. Any questions or comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, we have several suggested resolutions printed on page 8. These are pretty they pretty much repeat every year. So I guess the first one is to establish the salaries and reimbursements of school board members. The suggested resolution, again, is the first one on page 8. Nothing is changing on this. The school board salaries haven't changed in 100 years that I can remember. So, and you're only paid for those that you attend personally or remotely now, I would guess, huh? That's changed a little bit. So looking for a motion to accept the salaries and reimbursement schedule of the school board members as printed in page 8.
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution for salary and reimbursements as stated.
Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded to accept the established salaries and reimbursements of school board members as printed on page 8. Any other questions or comments? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. The next one is for travel reimbursement. That was part of that one, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry, okay. Then we have, I'm sorry. Oh, these different things. We only have one to it. Okay. The tax levy. Bill just gave a very detailed and report on the tax levy and what it includes. And if you're going to make this motion, I need you to read it verbatim. The suggested resolution is, again, the second one on page 8, resolution. So looking for that motion.
I move that there be levied a school tax assessed against all high school property in the Elk Grove schools using the sum of not more than $16,112,430 to the general fund, $637,680 to the community services fund, $4,841,453 to the
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded to accept resolution B. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. And last but not least, we need to approve the annual meeting time for next year, which will be July 24th, 2023. The suggested annual meeting time is 6 p.m. So, same as this year. Looking for that motion.
Also move.
And a second? It's been moved and seconded to approve the annual meeting time for 2023 at 6 p.m. on July 24th. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Any other business that someone would like to bring before our annual district meeting? Hearing none, we'll give for a motion to adjourn the meeting. So moved. And a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Sure.
That was it for that.